Hi, everyone. Welcome to our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar on mastering the sociology publication journey from submitting to publishing your research. To get us started today, I'd like to first introduce you to our expert team. Cassandra Garcia is a publishing editor for the social science journals at Sage. Publishing editors work with a set of journals along with their editors, authors, and reviewers to facilitate the publication of impactful and timely research. She manages journals in several disciplines, including business and management, public administration, and more. Next, Robert Tinkle, PhD, is a publishing editor for Sage, managing a suite of journals in humanities and social sciences. Before Sage, he earned his PhD in English literature from Johns Hopkins University, where he also served as associate editor for the journal English Literary History and directed the JHU Writing Center. He has published original research in journals devoted to Renaissance literature, culture, and history, and has taught several college-level courses in English and compositional writing. Next, Douglas Hartman is professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. He is the editor of the Journal of Sport and Social Issues and author of Midnight Basketball, Race, Sports, and Neoliberal Social Policy. Hartman is also co-publisher of the open access sociology website, thesocietypages.org, and a former co-editor of Context, the American Sociological Association's public outreach magazine. His current book project, to be published by Rutgers University Press, is called Ballers and Backlash, A Decade of Activism, Populism, and Polarization in American Sports. And next, Dr. Amy L. Stone is professor of sociology at Trinity University and author of books about LGBTQ life, including Queer Carnival, Festivals, and Mardi Gras in the South, and Coronation, San Antonio's Outrageous Fiesta Tradition. They co-direct the Family Housing and Me Project, also FHAM, a study of LGBTQ youth and housing instability in South Texas and the Inland Empire of California. They have served as the deputy editor for Gender and Society and are currently one of the inaugural editors of the new journal, Sex and Sexualities. And last, my name is Sean Scarsbrick. I'm a senior marketing manager on the community engagement team at Sage, and my primary role is to support authors and reviewers as they move through the publication process. I'd like to highlight in particular the works that Dr. Hartman and Dr. Stone work for with Sage, these two journals listed on the screen here. If you find yourself interested in these journals, please consider them for your publications and also consider signing up as a reviewer if you're interested. Throughout today's call, send us all the questions you may have in the Q&A. You'll see the box at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can, whether that's typing answers or talking at the end of the call. And any we don't get to, we'll follow up with in a blog post after the webinar. Quickly to situate us, I want to just share a typical journey of the publication process for authors, from the very beginning of securing funding all the way through publication and article promotion. In our webinar program, we've highlighted a number of these different steps, so do feel free to consult recordings of these webinars and also join us for upcoming and future webinars. And with that, I'm very happy to pass it over to Cassandra.
Thanks, Sean. Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra, and I'm going to start us off by talking about how to prepare your paper for submission. So, you've conducted your research and you're ready to write your paper. Before you start, consider these questions and address them in your manuscript. What is the purpose or goal of the paper? Consider the key takeaways and the significance of your message. How does your research build on existing knowledge? What makes your research novel or innovative? Are you confident in your findings and your research? And what are the limitations? You also want to think about who is your target audience? Why are they going to be interested? Why do they care? When deciding where to submit, consider those journals that are read by your target audience. Now, as you start writing, you want to be mindful of article structure. The outline here is a very generic example, but each journal will have their own requirements for article structure, so be sure to read and follow the submission guidelines carefully. First is usually the title, abstract, and keywords. Your title should be concise, descriptive, unambiguous, accurate, and reflect the precise contents of your paper. Your abstract should similarly concisely state the purpose of your research, major findings, and conclusions. A good title and abstract can improve the likelihood of your article being discovered and read. Consider terms used frequently in your manuscript, along with potential search terms someone would use that would lead them to your paper. Make sure those terms are included in the title, the abstract, and your keywords. It's also worth noting that the title and abstract are shared with potential reviewers. If your title and abstract are easy to read and clearly outline what the manuscript is about, reviewers may be more likely to agree to review your paper and reduce the time your paper is in review. Then you'll want to add an introduction. This is where you'll clearly state the purpose of your study and the questions you're addressing. Allude to the implications of your research to capture attention. You will also want to address how your research adds to existing literature and what that literature is. After your introduction, typically you'll get into the methods. You'll want to try to explain your research methods while avoiding overly complex language. What methods or techniques did you use for your research? How many people were surveyed? What was the response rate? Include these kinds of important details that will help contextualize your findings. Use tables, charts, and other graphics as relevant. This could help complicated methodology become more accessible to readers. And make sure you check the manuscript submission guidelines for any requirements on how you should be presenting your data. Your results and discussion will typically follow methods. This is where you'll share your results and how they answered your research questions. You'll also discuss how your research contributes to existing literature and what your results mean. You can also discuss the complications that may have arose or any limitations of your work. Your conclusion is usually a separate section where you can explain the impact and implications of your results, as well as any concluding thoughts and takeaways, such as recommendations for future studies. You also want to clearly state any calls to actions or implications for practitioners, policymakers, educators, etc. The final part of your paper usually contains end statements. These will be acknowledgments, conflicts of interest, data availability, funding statements, patient or participant consent, research ethics. The journal's submission guidelines should clearly state which end statements the journal requires for submission. And when in doubt, reach out to the journal's editorial team. Now let's move on to language and rating. You want to be mindful of your language as you write your paper, and here are some key recommendations. First, it's essential to use clear and simple language as much as possible. Writing in an active voice helps ensure that ideas are communicated directly and effectively. This approach improves readability and makes the content more engaging for a broad audience. Before drafting a manuscript, authors are encouraged to read articles from the target journal. This can provide insight into the journal's preferred language, tone, or terminology. This step is especially important for aligning with the expectations of both editors and readers. For journals that cater to practitioners, policymakers, or other audiences outside of academia, use language that is accessible to non-academic audiences. This ensures that your research can be understood and applied by professionals in the field. If the paper includes key takeaways or recommendations, particularly those relevant to practitioners or policymakers, these should be clearly highlighted. Explicitly calling out these points increases the practical impact of your work. Authors may also benefit from using professional editing or translation services, such as Sage's author services. These services can help them make sure your manuscript meets the highest standards of clarity and representation and presentation. You can also check whether the journal accepts submissions in languages other than English. Some journals may allow the full article or at least the abstract to be published in the author's preferred language. And finally, the use of AI tools in manuscript preparation should be approached with caution. Authors must consult the journal's submission guidelines and review Sage's AI policy to determine whether such tools are permitted. Unauthorized use of AI tools may lead to ethical or procedural issues during the review process. Another thing to consider before submission is research integrity. Read and adhere to the journal's peer review and research ethic policies. which are listed on the submission guidelines. You will also want to familiarize yourself with SAGE's publication ethics and editorial policies, which include our authorship guidelines and AI policy. Some journals will require or recommend certain end statements in your paper, which I mentioned earlier, or they might ask you for this information at submission. Check the journal's submission guidelines to discover what is required, and if you need clarification, reach out to the journal's editorial team before submission. For all SAGE journals, authors are required to disclose any direct or indirect interests that relate to the submission of any SAGE journal so that the editor, reviewers, and readers will be able to make informed judgments about any potential bias in the research process, writing, or publication. All papers submitted to SAGE journals will also need a funding statement with the funding agency and grant numbers, or you will need to confirm that no funding was received for your paper. When relevant, also be sure to include your approval or IRB numbers in your research ethics statements. If your paper includes content not originally authored or created by you or your co-authors, you will need to seek the necessary permissions or licenses to use that content in your paper. Make sure you clear permissions before submission and include a statement that you secured permissions in your manuscript. You also want to be aware that there are predatory publishers and groups who will offer you publication for a fee. They could be posing as a journal editor or claim to be a third-party service who will submit a paper on your behalf. You want to verify each person and email address before responding or proceeding with any actions. Verify if this person is actually affiliated with the journal. If the email address is present on the submission guidelines, check to see if it matches. If they're asking you for a fee, confirm that there is indeed a fee on the journal's submission guidelines. For more tips on how to avoid predatory groups, you can check out the blog linked here, which you can access after we distribute the slides after the webinar. Now let's talk about submitting your paper. Now that you've written your paper, you need to find the right journal. Choosing the right journal is crucial to improving your chances of your article being accepted and your research having impact. Sociology journals cover a range of topics, subfields, and subjects within the discipline. Consider the scope of your paper and then consider which subfields are relevant. When choosing between journals, make sure to read the aims and scope of each journal, as journals that may seem similar could publish completely different content or ask you to present your findings within certain frameworks or use certain methodology. You also want to familiarize yourself with their published articles, taking note of formatting, tone, and sections typically included. The journal's homepage can also offer a whole lot of information and a glimpse into what the review and publication process might be like. This includes key metrics like citation impact, review and publication times, the anonymization status of their peer review, and often the rejection rate. Sage has two free tools that you can use to find journals, the Sage Journal Recommender tool and Sage Path. The Journal Recommender tool is a free web-based tool that allows you to input your article title and keywords, then it matches those terms to a relevant Sage journal. Sage Path is an article transfer service where you submit your article to Sage Path, and that service will pair your paper with a relevant Sage journal. The main difference between the two is that you do not need to upload or submit your paper to use the Journal Recommender tool. It may be also helpful to check out Sage's Sociology, Gender Studies, and Cultural Studies Discipline Hub, which includes a list of all the journals we publish within the discipline. Other ways you can search for journals include databases like Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar, along with other indexing databases which you can usually access via your institution's library. You should also be reaching out to your peers and supervisors for insight and advice. They might have experiences to share that will help you determine where you can submit your paper. And if you're looking to publish open access or your funder is requiring it, you'll also want to check if your institution has an open access agreement with the journal's publisher. Publishers usually have a website on open access where you can check to see if your journal article will qualify for an open access agreement. At Sage, we do have an open access information site where you can find Sage journals which have open access publishing options, as well as a list of institutions we have an open access agreement with. Once you found the right journal, it's time to start preparing for submission. A good first stop is the submission guidelines. You want to read these carefully and pay attention to specific requirements like word limits, article structure and headings, reference style, abstract and keyword requirements, figures, and end statements. Editors really appreciate the effort you put in here. If you do not follow the guidelines, there is a large chance your paper might be unsubmitted and sent back for adjustments before even being considered. You'll also want to review your paper carefully for readability, language quality, and formatting. Utilize language editing services if needed. Some journals may require a cover letter, which should be stated on the submission guidelines. Be sure to include this with your manuscript files upon submission. You'll also want to double check that you've obtained permissions for any copyrighted material and make sure that this is acknowledged as a statement in your paper. You may also consider enhancing your submission with any supplemental data, visual abstracts, figures, or sharing your data sets. Many journals can host this kind of supplementary content. Think about what might add value or help readers understand your research better. A final and very important step is to make sure your paper is anonymized properly for review. Many journals have a double anonymized peer review policy, so you will need to check that all identifiable information has been removed. If you ever have questions about submission requirements, reach out to the journal's editorial office. You can typically find their information at the bottom of the submission guideline. So you've done the prep work, and now it's time to submit. The submission site is usually linked on the submission guidelines, and please note that you can only submit to one journal at a time. Most Sage journals will use the ScholarOne platform called SageTrack. You will need to create an account for each journal you wish to submit. Be sure to link your ORCID and Web of Science profile as soon as you create an account. That way, it is connected to all your current and future submissions. Then once you're ready to submit your paper, follow the steps outlined in the platform. You will be asked to confirm all the article information, including title, keywords, authors, affiliation, funders, etc. This is also when you will upload your manuscript along with any supplemental files or documents, such as the cover letter. Make sure to read all the declarations and statements carefully within the submission form. The checkboxes that you tick may have really important ethical ramifications or may involve agreeing to pay an additional charge, such as for OA publication or charges for additional pages. Now, I'm going to pass it off to Robert, who will talk about the peer review process and production.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Cassandra. So as Cassandra said, I'll be talking about kind of the next steps here, which is peer review, kind of what it is, what it looks like, how it tends to go, and then also the production of your submitted article, of your accepted article, rather. Okay, so let's say you've submitted a paper. It's now in peer review. What does that actually look like? So this slide, you'll see an image of kind of the peer review pipeline. Starting with submission. So the first thing that's going to happen is the paper is going to go through a couple different compliance checks. The first is to check for compliance with those manuscript submission guidelines that Cassandra talked about in previous slides. This would include all of the kind of unique details of kind of how the journal that you're submitting to wants manuscripts to be formatted. So that will include things like, the journal's preferred citation style, whether that's, APA, MLA, Chicago, what have you. You want to make sure that your article is kind of within the word limits or word count, and that other kind of manuscript guidelines are being adhered to. The second compliance check is for fit with the journal's aims and scope. We'll talk about this a little bit more in future slides, but this is sort of the editor's determination of whether the manuscript is kind of the right fit for the journal in terms of kind of the journal description and aims and scope. You want to really make sure before you submit that you are reading the journal's description, names, and scope so that your paper is not possibly rejected at this stage. If it is rejected at this stage, we call that a desk reject. However, if the manuscript passes both of these compliance checks, it will then be sent out for peer review. Typically, peer reviewers are selected by use of keywords. So every sort of peer reviewer, or most peer reviewers, will have sort of keywords that are kind of tagged with their profile that sort of give an overview of the kinds of research interests that they have, and help them determine kind of what kind of manuscripts are suitable for them to review. You as an author will typically also attach keywords to your submission in the author portal at the time of submitting. So this will kind of help match you up with the peer reviewer. Once those reviewers are found, an email will be sent out. A reviewer might decline to review the submission for any number of reasons, either as kind of a fit issue, maybe they just simply don't have the time to take on a full review of a manuscript right now, or the reviewer might, of course, accept. Now, kind of in keeping with industry ethical guidelines, SAGE typically requires, almost always requires, that two external reviewers be sought for a manuscript. And so this means that you should expect your manuscript to spend a bit of time in the peer review pipeline as your editor or associate editors are seeking out reviewers, at least two of them, to review your manuscript. During this process, you can always visit the reviewer center in Sage Track to kind of check in on the status of your submission and kind of see where it is in this peer review pipeline. Once those reviewers are found and they've accepted to review, they will then sort of perform the review and then make a final recommendation to the editor. That recommendation will come in the form either of a reject and accept, or what's called a revise and resubmit, which gives you the opportunity to revise the paper and then submit it again for another review. Great. So you can also, if somebody who's active in the field, you can also volunteer to review. To maybe demystify the process a little, for some of you who might not know, there is no kind of secret cabal of reviewers. Anybody who's active in the field can become a peer reviewer, including yourself, if you're interested. So there's some kind of suggestions here for how to go about doing that. There's a couple different ways you might approach this. One is to navigate to the journal's peer review site and kind of volunteer to review that way. Using a good active email address. Typically, this would be like an institutional address if you have one. You'll also create what's called an ORCID ID, which will include your sort of affiliation, your degrees and qualifications. And then again, you want to be sure that you're adding really strong, helpful keywords to your profile so that you can be matched up with manuscripts that are relevant to you and your own research expertise and interests. Another way to do this would be to create a Web of Science account, which will enable you to create a reviewer profile. Or you can even just email an editor. If there's a particular journal that you're interested in reviewing for, you can reach out to the editor, sort of volunteer yourself and have some back and forth with the editor about sort of how to go about becoming a peer reviewer. We really recommend, if you're interested at all in doing this, peer review, as you've seen from the previous slide, is a really crucial element of the research ecosystem. Journals wouldn't be able to operate without them. So they're hugely important. And if you have any interest at all in reviewing, we do recommend that you reach out and get involved that way. Now, for some examples of keywords, we kind of have a list here of sort of good keywords and not so good or not so effective keywords. Good keywords might include things like corporate environmentalism or institutional theory, frontline workers, gender inequality, as opposed to sort of less effective keywords, which might just be things like environment, theory, workers, inequality. What you want to do here is you want to kind of find that nice middle ground between words that are not sort of too broad or open-ended, but also not too narrow and constricted. So kind of finding that balance. You'll see that the good keywords here sort of follow an adjective noun format. So if we take inequality, for example, inequality is a huge subject. Unfortunately, there are many different kinds of inequality, so it doesn't necessarily make an effective keyword for your research. Whereas if you pair it with an adjective like gender inequality, now we've narrowed the scope down a little bit. And this will just help a researcher, let's say your article goes on to be published, a researcher will, if they pull up Google Scholar or a similar search engine and type in a term like gender inequality, it's specific enough that hopefully your research, your article will sort of presented to them in that search. So again, it's kind of finding that right balance between not too specific, but not too open-ended either. All right, so there are any number of reasons why a paper might get rejected before peer review at that desk reject stage. As I alluded to on a previous slide, the number one reason a paper is desk rejected is that it's out of scope, that it doesn't kind of meet or fit the aims and scope of the journal. So again, you want to really do your due diligence before you submit to kind of read through the journal description, read through the aims and scope. These will be published on the journal's webpage. and really make sure that this journal is the right home for your piece. There's very good research, very solid, well-researched arguments that are rejected, and it's because they just aren't the right fit for that particular journal. There might be another peer journal that would be an excellent fit for them. So a desk rejection at that stage doesn't necessarily mean that your research is flawed in some way. It might just mean that the journal is not the right fit for what you're up to in your submission. So really make sure that you do your due diligence there to understand the journal and kind of what it's all about. Another reason would be that, and we've talked about this already, that your journal does not meet those manuscript submission guidelines or submission requirements, or that there's incorrect formatting, either of tables, figures, images, that kind of thing. So really make sure as well before you submit that you carefully read through those manuscript guidelines, that you're using the journal's preferred citation style, that you're within the word count, that all the necessary end statements have been included, and that kind of thing. Another reason is wrong manuscript type. Typically, especially if you're using the Scholar One portal, you'll be asked to kind of label your manuscript as sort of belonging to one article type or another from a list of options. Whether it's a book review, a piece of original research, a case study. So just make sure that you're sort of you're tagging your article as the appropriate thing, and that you're also kind of following the submission guidelines that are requisite for your article type. Another reason would be language, grammar, or syntax errors. This is not just a typo or two. Almost every manuscript, the point of submission is going to have some typos in it. These are kind of sustained issues in language, grammar, syntax, or things that will kind of cause a reader to have difficulty either understanding your argument or navigating through it. So kind of repeated patterns of error or other issues could kind of hamper a manuscript and cause it to be desk rejected. Another thing, and this kind of is of a piece with the issue of being out of scope, is relevancy. Every journal kind of has its own audience, right? Its own kind of readership. And so you want to make sure that, and again, this is kind of in line with keeping your paper in scope for the journal, that you are kind of pitching to the correct audience, or the journal's kind of typical audience. Some journals, have a global or international focus. Others are more locally focused. The typical audience for the journal might be practitioners, or it might be scholars and researchers, or it might be some combination of those. So again, as you kind of read through the journal's aims and scope and description, it might either be explicit or implicit, kind of who that audience is, and you just really want to make sure that your manuscript is to the journal submitted to, the journal submitted to has kind of the correct audience for kind of who your own research is also being pitched to. Another issue would be sort of problems with methodology, and then also finally clarity. And clarity is kind of a piece with the language, grammar, or syntax question, except with clarity, we're kind of looking less maybe at the sentence level and more at the big picture. So you want to really make sure that your argument is well structured, well ordered, that the paragraph order makes sense, that the kind of order of sections is appropriate, and making sure that you're really kind of answering that so what question, right? You might have done some really great research, come up with some really cool findings, but you want to make sure that kind of at the end of the day, it's clear what contribution you are making to the field. What is this really great argument and research and data? What is that contributing to kind of a field of inquiry? So making sure that your article is clear at that level is also hugely important. All right, so let's say you do receive a rejection. What you're going to want to do at that point is carefully read the reviewer and editor feedback so that you can really get that full understanding of why that reject decision was made. Again, there's any number of reasons why a paper might get rejected, either at desk reject or after peer review. If it did make it to peer review and then was ultimately rejected, reviewers, maybe were not convinced of the way that the submission addressed that so what question, right? They might not be convinced of the contribution to the knowledge base. The methods might not be robust enough, or maybe not the right kinds of methods for that journal. The submission might be very good overall, but maybe specific sections are missing or are sort of inadequate in some way. Or it's possible the paper was sort of unfocused or out of focus or fundamentally flawed in some way in the reviewer's opinion. Remember, if you do receive a rejection, that criticisms are there to enhance your paper. They're not a personal critique. This is not a referendum on you as a as a scholar or as a researcher, right? This is the judgment of a few peer reviewers on this particular submission. So try to keep that rejection in context, focus on why this manuscript was rejected, and give yourself some grace in kind of digesting that decision. It's also important to note that very few articles are outright accepted or accepted unconditionally. It's very, very rare. It almost never happens that a paper is submitted and sort of goes through peer review and is accepted in exactly that condition that you initially submitted it in. More often than not, if it's not rejected, it will get a revise and resubmit decision rather than an outright acceptance. And in that case, you can rework the paper to address those reviewer concerns, seek any kind of help from your institution or elsewhere if needed. And always remember that you can always submit to another journal and just be persistent in finding a journal that is the right home and the right fit for your paper. All right, so let's say you do get that revise and resubmit decision. How should you go about handling revisions? Again, you're going to want to read the reviewer comments in the editor's letter very carefully, follow any timeframes that are requested. So, if they ask for your revisions back within, let's say, 3 weeks, make sure you abide by that timeline and get it back within 3 weeks. And this is really important. You want to very clearly demonstrate what you have changed point by point. So really go through, address each reviewer's point in a separate document, and make sure you're kind of hitting all of the major and minor recommendations that they may have made. If you can't meet all criticisms, make sure that you explain why. Don't just kind of gloss over them or leave them to the side. Make sure that you have kind of an accounting for every point that the reviewers have made. Now, it is sometimes the case that reviewers will be in conflict with each other. You might get reviewer A telling you to kind of go one direction, and reviewer B might be pushing you in another direction. This does happen. It's especially important in that case that you sort of address why you've opted to kind of move the paper in one direction or another, or have opted to make revision A over revision B, or maybe opted not to revise a particular element at all. So just make sure that you have a kind of clearly articulated explanation for those revisions that you've either made or opted not to make. Of course, in terms of your tone and your correspondence with editorial staff, always be positive and polite, professional. This is not sort of an opportunity to be sort of argumentative or combative with the journal editor or reviewers. You want to really kind of keep your focus forward facing and really just maintain that kind of professional tone. And understand finally that the process may take 2 or 3 iterations. So if you get a revise and resubmit, you make all your revisions, you submit to the journal again, it's possible you might get another revise and resubmit. So don't let that discourage you. It's totally normal. It happens all the time. It might take 2 or 3 times of sort of back and forth with reviewers before the article is really in a shape to that the editor feels confident publishing it in its current form, in its revised form. All right, so let's say you've been through all this, you get an accept decision, congratulations. Your paper at that point will be exported to production. So every production team has a production editor who's kind of the main point of contact in coordinating the production process. So the production editor will keep close tabs on authors and editors and kind of help move things along through the production pipeline. Your article will be copy edited and typeset, at which point you will receive proofs of the article. It's really important that you carefully read through these proofs, check everything. Don't just assume that everything is fine. There could be, any number of errors, your kind of garden variety typos, but there could also be, issues with your author information, with your end statements, ORCID information, your data presentation. So really make sure you're going through those proofs carefully and sending back any necessary edits or revisions. The production team will take those revisions, make those revisions, at which point the production editor will sort of do a final check, and then your article will be ready for publication. Note that articles will rarely go straight into an issue. There's often a period of sometimes several months where they are published online, or what we consider online first, but they just haven't been assigned to a volume or issue yet. However, when they're at that stage, that online first stage, they are sort of a fully citable article. They're included in most indexes. They receive what's called a DOI, or digital object identifier. So for all intents and purposes, that article is published. It's ready to be cited. It's readable. It's as official as it can be without being sort of given a volume or issue number yet. And eventually it will receive that issue number. It'll be put into an issue and sorted into that table of contents. But just be aware that there is often a period of time where it sort of just exists in what's called an online first phase. Okay, and finally, we're going to talk a little bit about promoting your article. So publication is not at the end of your paper's journey. In fact, from a certain point of view, it might just be the beginning, right? Because this is kind of the moment once your article is finally published. This is where it sort of becomes a fully public document, right? It's sort of publicly available. And this is kind of the beginning then of your articles sort of being taken up by readership and circulated. So there's a couple things you can do to kind of help promote your piece. Again, at the beginning of all this, as you're submitting, be thinking about those keywords in order to help increase the discoverability of your paper. You want to think about search engine optimization. What kinds of keywords might a reader be sort of plugging into Google Scholar or a similar search engine to find research in your field. And be sure to include these keywords in your title and abstract as well, so that your article is more discoverable. You'll want to, if you haven't already, sign up for an ORCID to get an ORCID ID and connect that ID to your publications, so that there's kind of a running list of your publications there. You might also think about including a link to your paper and your ORCID profile in your email signature, so that anyone that you interact with by email sort of has easy access to it. And then, of course, if you have an institutional profile, you'll also want to update that along with your CV with your latest publication. Don't be shy about sort of sharing your paper with colleagues, students, and communities, either online or in person, at conferences, different networking opportunities. Don't be shy about promoting your paper that way. And finally, a lot of scholars these days are sort of presenting their research in sort of creative alternative formats. So you might think about things like infographics, videos, visual abstracts, even some journals publish podcast episodes, have a podcast series that will if you're brought on as a guest, you actually have the opportunity to kind of discuss your article in a more sort of conversational format, and other graphics to sort of help demonstrate your research. You might also think about writing a blog for practitioner newsletters. Sage actually runs its own blog series called Sage Perspectives. We're always happy to sort of take up recently published research and give you the opportunity to kind of write a more kind of short form, layman's terms summary of your research for wider circulation, and just kind of distill your research for a more general audience. So some things to think about. These slides will be presented to you, delivered to you at the end of this webinar. So you'll have the opportunity, you'll see there's a link at the bottom of this slide to click the promote your article and find out more ways to kind of circulate your published piece and maximize your impact. So definitely visit that for more ideas on how to do that. Okay, that's it from me. Now I will hand it off to Dr. Amy Stone.
So I'm going to just give some very quick tips as an editor of one of the editors of Sex and Sexualities. I also was the deputy editor of Gender and Society for 4 years back in the day. And there's 3 things that are really important for me when I'm evaluating whether or not a manuscript will become a successful journal article in our journal. First is the framing of the article. So sometimes, particularly younger scholars or very excited scholars, they pitch their articles very broadly. They're trying to cover a lot of territory in a small amount of space. You may have between 4,000 and 8,000 words really to make an argument, and they're trying to make too much argument in that space. And so you kind of need a really tight framing where you're asking and answering a very specific research question in order to make it to be a successful article of the length that it is. And that's a major issue. So making sure that that framing really kind of matches with whatever research you have. Sometimes you have really creative, amazing research, but it's like kind of unclear why it's so important, right? And that framing ends up, it kind of makes or breaks whether or not a manuscript is going to become a journal article. So sometimes I find it helpful to reverse outline papers where I go through each paragraph and I try to figure out what the argument of that paragraph is and whether or not it forms a really clear and coherent argument. The second is an issue about fit. And I would say this is the reason why most things are desk rejected from Sex and Sexualities, is that we're a social science journal, mostly sociology, but we take other social scientific work. And then it should be about sex or sexuality. And that should be kind of the main focus of the article, right? So if it really kind of doesn't talk about that, or it doesn't have any social science research in it, that's the most common reason that something gets desk rejected, right? So it's really a good idea to look at some of the journal articles published by that journal and really kind of articulate how your paper fits in, right? So it should be really clear in the introduction and the abstract how your paper fits in to sex and sexualities, what your contribution is to sexuality studies, and the ways that your paper is, a social science paper. It should be like just very clear from the very beginning. Because remember that editors are looking through lots and lots of different manuscripts. And often that weeding out at our journal, that's done by a managing editor who reads all of those, right? And says, well, this is an English paper, right? Um, Finally, you really want to research the available formats for the journal. For example, at ours, we have these longer empirical articles, but we have like also short research notes for some exploratory research, or we have perspectives articles that are more like think pieces. So you really want to look and see, under submission, you know, expectations, like what kinds of options that you have and model your manuscript after existing published articles from that journal. Often I sit down and have my students map out like, oh, in this journal, usually the introduction is a couple of paragraphs. Usually the literature review is only a couple of pages, right? Usually the methods have these components in them typically. And so really kind of be attentive to that. And I'll pass this off to Dr. Doug.
All right, thank you, Amy. I'm going to build on what you said. I wanted to start by saying really quickly, though, publishing is super hard. I'm a little down this morning. I got a rejection last night on a paper that my colleagues and I worked on for several years and thought was really good. So it's an ongoing, lifelong career-long challenge. The main things I want to say here, there's three main points. The first one is really reiterating what was said before and what I took as one of Amy's also key points is just making sure that the paper you submit is a fit with the journal and fit both content-wise and in terms of format. In terms of doing that, make sure you read the journal and understand the aims and objective statements. Those are really serious and important, even if you might be easy to overlook them. I'd say model what you're writing format-wise after articles that have been published in the journal, and really try to be in dialogue with some of the articles or authors who've been published either most recently or most importantly in the journal. And if you can't find a fit in terms of a model or people in that journal that have published to be in dialogue with, you might want to think about a different journal. So reconsider where you submit. My second point is about interdisciplinarity and kind of realizing that some journals are more welcoming and accommodating about this than others. And this applies, I'd say, both to the format of articles. There's a lot of different formats that different disciplines kind of champion and use and then kind of don't use. So you want to pay attention to that. But then also about actual content of scholarship, research, and argumentation, and making sure that if it's interdisciplinary or cross disciplines, that you're kind of clear about where you're coming from and how that might be in dialogue with people from other kind of fields, disciplines, or approaches. The third thing I wanted to say is probably the thing that's the least understood for me a lot of times among authors, and it's about how to respond to reviews and reviewers. The first basic point I would say, especially for new scholars, younger scholars, is don't revisions are almost certain. Like getting an R&R or a major revision is not failure, that's success. I don't think I've really published anything that was just straight out accepted. It always requires revision, adaptation, responding to reviews and reviewers. And I think it's very helpful, and this is my second big aspect of this, to think of the review process as collaborative rather than combative. I think an awful lot of times when people get reviews, they think it's a fight to win. And I think far more constructive is getting review feedback and thinking about it as things that can make your paper better, that can get it more widely circulated, that can have it be more impactful in the field. I want to probably say a few things. I saw some of the questions come in about why to be a reviewer and some of the ways to handle R&Rs, but maybe we can hold off on that as we process all the different questions that are coming in.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you to all of our panelists today. We're going to move into the Q&A in just a second, but before we do so, I wanted to flag some upcoming webinars we've got. We have a packed agenda in the next few weeks. Next Wednesday, we have a webinar about what happens after publication, how to drive citations in your academic reach. So we'll be talking about the impact of being cited on Wikipedia and how to increase your chances of doing that. On February 11th, we'll have a webinar on that will break down the interactions you have with publishing staff. On February 8th, we'll be talking about curation, research curation, how to conduct good science in this era of misinformation. And at the end of the month, we'll have a webinar in honor of American Black History Month. Sorry, Black History Month in the US. And this will be specifically on how to support and strategies for early career Black scholars in academia. And we've got lots more coming, so I'll share that after the call as well. We have an information for Authors Hub where you have every and anything you need about authoring you can find there. And then also, I'll keep this on the screen as we move into the Q&A. We have a dedicated author newsletter that we'll send out quarterly to anybody who registers, where you get insights into new academic resources, and you'll also be the first to know about upcoming webinars. So feel free to register for that now. And now to dive into the Q&A, and I should say that as we talk through, please continue to send your questions, and we'll continue to sort through them and answer as many as we can live. Doug hinted at this one. We see a really good question here about the main advantages of being a reviewer. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about why someone should review and what the impacts of that are.
I'll start it off. I got three basic points. One is to be a good citizen and help colleagues and other researchers that are working on the same things you're working on. A second is I think you really get to help shape the field. You're deciding what's great, what's exciting, and what the new directions are. And the third one goes along with that, but it's a little more self-interested, which is you get to see on the front end new and exciting trends in the field. And it won't all be great. Sometimes it'll be dead ends or crazy ideas, but you'll see what new, young, other scholars are thinking about and how they're approaching it. So those are three pretty good reasons, I think, to say yes when you get asked to review papers.
I'm going to tag on to that. A colleague of mine once said that for every paper they submit, they review two more papers, right? Because that's the only way this works, right? Is that everyone is both, reviewing and submitting just numerically. And the other piece is kind of really understanding how the peer review process works by participating in it. So getting to see if you can the other people's reviews, like a lot of editors will send out like the reviews that everyone wrote, and you can see the kinds of things that people write, kind of the tone of reviews. And I think it helps you understand the reviews that come back on your own work in a more kind of complex way. Being part of an R&R or like reading somebody else's R&R helps you see what a good author's memo looks like and what kind of an adequate response to reviewer concerns looks like. So I think those are all really important socialization tools. I always tell grad students, try to review kind of early on, just to kind of see what the process looks like on the other end.
I can just say too from the Sage end, just in terms of maybe the self-interested motivation, we do offer, as a token of appreciation to reviewers, we do offer a 20% discount on all Sage author services. So that includes services like English language editing, formatting, plagiarism checks, all that good stuff. So you do get a discount there, as well as free access to all Sage journals for 60 days. And that's for each review. So just a couple perks there, and incentives to review if you are interested.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely lots of perks to get into. I see another question slightly related. So somebody's asked from an editor's perspective, and Amy and Doug, this is mostly for you. What are the most common issues you see in manuscripts during peer review? And what can an author do preemptively before they submit to take this into account?
I'll go ahead and start with that one. I would say the biggest issue I see is, again, kind of lack of clarity about what your paper's about, what the data's from, what the data's saying. Like, it doesn't tell like a coherent story. And so it's the thing that I comes up for me a lot. That's when things have actually gone into peer review. I would say on the desk reject side, it's common to desk reject things again if they kind of don't fit or like they're not formatted in a typical way. Or also if I suspect that AI has been used. Right? We face the same issues that professors do with students where we say like, oh, this seems like this does not seem like a human wrote this, right? So we run into that as well from time to time. But the main issue is like sort of this overall coherence of your manuscript. And does it all kind of like fit together? And is there clarity about what you did and what it means?
I would second that. To me, the fit and format's the number one thing. And I'll give you an example. Sports studies is a big and growing field. We get a lot of papers that clearly were intended for like a sport management or marketing journal and got rejected, and then they just send them to another journal, and without any attempt to engage the specific audience or aims of that particular journal. In this case, a most sociological kind of approach, perhaps. So that's another thing I think that really is frustrating and specific, but really it's about fit and format and really being attentive to where you're sending it and who you're trying to engage.
Thank you both. Good to have that insight there. And I see another question coming through that I think is helpful for us to discuss. What is one thing early career sociologists often underestimate about the publishing process that you wish more of them understood from the start?
I'll start on that one. I think that a lot of people are encouraged to think about the publishing process as a way to get feedback on your work. Um, but if you send it too early, you're not going to get good feedback. And so you kind of have to figure out the sweet spot of having it done enough to get reviews that are reasonable and constructive, not waiting too long, of course, but I think that the biggest thing I see is a lot of young scholars send it in too early and it's just not ready. And then I kind of what Amy and I were both saying before, it doesn't fit the format. It's like you know what you want to do, but you're not putting it into the context of the field, and in dialogue with other scholars. So I do think the review process can be constructive and iterative and helpful, but it can't if the papers aren't really professional yet and part of an intellectual, situating themselves in an intellectual community.
I think something important for early career scholars is to understand that if your paper gets sent out for review, like you're doing really well. Like you made it through the desk reject phase, which most papers get desk rejected, right? Most papers are not a good fit or whatever. So that acceptance rate is like not the acceptance rate of things that went out for peer review. It's like you did really well if you just went out for review at all. Like you're on a great track, right? If you get an R&R, even better, like your odds of it becoming an actual journal article are great, right? Um, so I think it's important to realize that like the peer review process, ideally, in an ideal world, should make your paper better. It should make your paper easier to understand. There may be some things that reviewers say that are really contradictory, and it's okay to email your editor about that. Like I think sometimes people think that they can't email editors about those kinds of things. But it's good to get some kind of clarity and or kind of make your decision as a scholar and just explain it well to reviewers what decision you made. It's sort of like any kind of constructive feedback that you take it in, you decide what's sort of helpful for your work, and then you kind of explain why you made that decision, right? So you're still the author of the work, but ideally you should make it better. The second thing is that I can't fix your methods, right? As an editor, sometimes things just get rejected because I'm just like not really sure what you did, right? Or you didn't talk to people kind of enough, you know? Like I don't want to quantify qualitative research, but I feel like you just have like very skimpy evidence and you're framing it like it's like everything, right? So I need to like I can't fix your methods. So if you have big methodological issues, in your project, like you kind of need to really either know how to frame those or like where a good place to submit them is, like because I'm not going to tell you go collect more interviews, right? Like that's just not feasible for a lot of projects. So you really need to kind of have a good methods, honestly, a good empirical study for a research article.
Can I jump off of one thing Amy alluded to with respect to corresponding with editors? I think, especially if you get an R&R, feel like it's very appropriate if you have questions about the direction to take to be in correspondence with the editor. That's some people think of that as taboo or off limits, and I really feel the opposite. Now, not every editor is going to respond to you or give you much feedback, but I think it's not out of bounds to ask. And kind of extending from that, because I think there was a couple questions in the threads already about R&Rs and how to do those. One thing I wanted to say two things on that. One is that I think the revision memos are pretty important, often extremely important for other reviewers, especially reviewers who reviewed your paper and want to give it a chance. They want to see that you addressed what they suggested. So that's your opportunity to do it. I would emphasize them for another reason, though. It's that you force yourself to be systematic and thorough about responding to suggestions. And that doesn't mean you're going to do everything they say, but it does mean you've got to think it through. And if you're going to not do some things, you need to explain that and justify it. And that's the other thing. I think there was a question about this, and I wanted to speak to it. When I'm looking at R&Rs, I don't always agree with everything the reviewers say. And so what I really look for in the revision memo, as well as the revision itself, is not that you've just like done every single thing step by step. It's that you've made the paper better and addressed things that you saw could make the paper better and maybe defended yourself when there were suggestions or criticisms that you think were out of bounds. I'm not impressed with revision memos that just say, I did this, 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 and this, and I'm done. I'm impressed with the revision memos and revisions that take the opportunity to make something better.
So many great points there. Communication, constantly improving. So many good things to take away from that conversation. I think we've got about 2 minutes left, so we've got room for one last question. And I think this is a really nice one. Somebody in the chat asked, what is the single most important piece of advice you'd give to somebody who wants to submit a manuscript for the first time?
Patience, probably. Like, patience with the process, right? Patience and sort of some determination too, being like, okay, like I went in, it got rejected. I don't know why, right? I'm gonna send it somewhere else. One of my highest ranked and also very well cited articles went to 3 journals before it got published. Like doing R&R on it, like it just was like an argument was kind of hard to come together, and then it ended up literally like working up to like better journals, quite honestly. Like I ended up in a much better journal than it started. So you have to just kind of have some patience with the process.
Uh, Amy, suffering through a rejection last night, I appreciate the patience point very much. I would just reiterate, to me, one of the main themes that comes through here is find the right journal, fit and format. And to me, that's the biggest thing. A little bit more for junior scholars, I'd say maybe make sure you've got a study that's ready to be published too. Because I do think sometimes you feel the pressure to publish, but you don't necessarily have work that's ready to publish. So don't try to publish until you've got some study or some analysis that's ready for the world.
Thank you very much. That is great tips. Those are great tips. I really appreciate that. Um, to everybody who is joining us live, I want to thank you for your time. We will send an email with a certificate of attendance shortly after this call. So look for a from line, including the word virtual badge. It'll be coming directly from them. And we will also send the slides and a recording in a separate email within the next week or so. Thank you very much to everybody who is joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists, to Doug, Amy, Cassandra, and Robert, for all of your expertise and for all of your expert knowledge. To everybody joining, we hope to see you in a future webinar. We have a packed agenda for the next few weeks, so please pop in. We'd love to see you again. Thank you, and take care.